the intervention you attempted to perform on our mutual friend Joe.
I think I've done the right thing, which I...
Joe has more than his fair share of responsibility for that. And alternative media in general, the big podcasts in general, but Joe above all, given his taste for conspiracy thinking and given the lessons he has drawn from COVID. I mean, I share your concern about the failure of institutions and obviously the woke ideological capture of so many mainstream institutions.
Not the woke.
Distorted scientific communication has certainly distorted journalism, and it has predictably and to a degree that's intolerable destroyed trust in those institutions.
Yep.
But the remedy for all of that is not mere contrarian anti-establishment know-nothingism. I feel like I'm riding shotgun on at least one car crash of late. We're going to talk about your experience on the Joe Rogan Experience, and it was an experience. But we're going to talk about your book as a...
I'm not sure I like the opening about a car crash, but yeah.
I'll
Maybe Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah, it'll be justified.
You get out of a crash and just get into another car.
Yeah. Well, I think that is our method. But you have a book on democracies and death cults, Israel and the Future of Civilization, which is, I guess, is part of now a quartet of books: the Strange Death of Europe, the Death of the West, or
the War of the West,
Madness of Crowds, and Madness of Crowds.
Yeah,
I mean, all of which hit this same grotesque object of Western capitulation to unreason and a kind of masochistic flight from sanity in the face of the provocation of Islamism and jihadism and other attendant confusions. I think we will cover all that. I'm definitely going to track through the book with you, but I want to start with the intervention you attempted to perform on our mutual friend Joe. I hope he's still a mutual friend. That remains to be seen, I guess. But and his sidekick Dave Smith.
Doesn't look sped up with all this. I'm just having a really hard time with people who don't seem to who don't carry their values or their philosophy forward through everything. I don't know. Like, we'll see how this show with Douglas Murray goes. Like, listen, I like Alex O'Connor. I've never had anything but good interactions with him. Like, I've never seen him do anything bad or say anything bad. I'm literally just projecting this, I think, based off the last show that I did with him. Alex O'Connor feels like the kind of guy who would be indifferent between, like, Kamala or Trump being elected. And then, like, when the way that they analyze things doesn't seem to ever carry over to any other branch of their understanding or analysis of the world, it breaks my brain. But I don't know, maybe he's not like that, and I'm just making an unfair assumption. I'm not sure.
Over on the podcast, because I thought what you attempted there was fantastic and much needed. I mean, this was a kind of moral intervention, which I thought was very important to do. I've been attempting my version of it, not directly in dialogue with Joe, but I certainly would do that as well. But I thought what you said was quite brilliant and important, and I think there are probably a few crucial points that were misunderstood, and so I'd like to do a bit of a post-mortem on that. But
sure.
I'm wondering what your experience of it was. How do you view, how much of the aftermath have you seen? No doubt, even if you don't read comments, you're still getting some of the comments somehow, because
I don't read comments. I don't really follow very closely. If I think I've done the right thing, which I try to do routinely. I don't think I ever knowingly mean to do the wrong thing. But if I do something which I feel perfectly content with myself in, that I can look myself in the mirror the next morning, I have no interest in seeing what people rampaging across the internet have to say. So although there is a certain type of almost friend who can never resist sending you the nastiest. Yeah.
What are the good arguments against accelerationism? The only argument that you should ever have against accelerationism is you don't know what you're accelerating into.
Response they've seen online is saying, I disagree with this person.
That's right. I don't think you're nearly that fat or ugly. What was your experience of attempting that intervention? How did how did it strike you in the moment?
Well, I like Joe, and enormously admire what he's done. He's so good at talking about interesting things with guests easily and for a long time that a lot of other people think that it's extremely easy, and it just isn't. He's a master of it.
How does a recession affect online content creators business-wise? Do any markets thrive during a recession? I imagine like budget services would. Like there was that joke. It's not a joke, actually. I guess it was real. That the only stock that was up when all the tariffs and shit got announced was like the stock for like the dollar store, I think. So I'm sure stuff like that does marginally better. But no, generally just hurts everybody.
I had noticed that he had, in recent years, not really had anyone on who had my views about the Russia-Ukraine conflict, or indeed about the Israel-Hamas conflict. And he had some people on who I have had to become aware of, very annoyingly, like all of us, but who are just retreads of a school of pseudo-history which was seen off a long time ago, and which I dislike. And I suppose I just wanted to try to say to Joe as gently as possible that I thought that something was going very badly wrong here, and that he was misleading his viewers about listeners about what the story is on each of these things. That specifically that Ukraine actually does have a right to defend itself against Putin's aggression. Israel has a right to defend itself against Hamas's brutal invasion of Israel, and I believe, and just wait for this, I think Adolf Hitler was a really bad guy. I do. As Norm Macdonald said,
Maybe among the worst.
I've said it before, I'll say it again. I said it before it was cool to say it. I think Adolf Hitler was the bad guy of World War II, and I think Churchill was one of the people in history who saved civilization, almost single-handed at one point in 1940. And so when I see people just throwing out this absolute rubbish about, for instance, what they try to do is they try to minimize the crimes of Hitler. They try to maximize the crimes of Churchill. This is what David Irving used to try before he was completely debunked as well. And then what you do is you have this thing where you say that the Allies and the Nazis were on an equal footing in World War II, and then you go for your next move, which is actually the Allies were the baddies. Right. I can't put up with that. It's intolerable to sit by and see this stuff going on. And so, yes, I tried to cite that. I was, of course, the whole thing was 2 against 1 because although Joe has had people like comic Dave Smith, who, by the way, I've yet to hear being funny on anything. Maybe somebody else can point me to it, but he just spent 18 months criticizing Israel in the most ignorant terms. And I was annoyed that Joe had said, you can only come on if you're on with comic Dave Smith, whereas just a week before, comic Dave Smith was on his own once again sound.
Oh, shit. Wait, was this already public knowledge? Then it's true. The Douglas Murray and Dave Smith thing, that was Joe Rogan doing responsible platforming. That's actually, there's a really big implication to that. That means that Joe Rogan does understand responsible platforming, but he was platforming against the anti-Israel or the pro-Israel take. Because he knew that he didn't want to bring on Douglas Murray because Douglas Murray was going to give a bunch of talking points that were anti-Hamas, I guess, or pro-Israel that Joe Rogan couldn't deal with. So then he has to have Dave Smith on as the responsible platforming. Oh my God. It's in his New York Post op-ed.
And often he didn't seem to need a bodyguard or tag team double or anything like that. So okay, it's 2 against 1. I've had worse odds, but it makes it extremely difficult, undoubtedly, because, if I'd had a sidekick, they could have mopped up some of my points, but,
I think there are several reasons why it was almost an impossible task. I mean, there's something... I should just say the only tasks worth doing are the impossible. Right. I'd like to try to track through what I think is kind of the center of their confusion, because I think there's something that's genuinely hard to parse here around the role of expertise and what it is, how we recognize it, when we honor it, how you avoid arguing from authority, etc. I think that some of that stuff is genuinely confusing, and they were mightily confused by it and quite content to be, and felt that you were simply arguing from authority and urging upon them some kind of mere credentialism. It was clear to me you weren't doing that, but and this relates obviously to both the topics you were touching, the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza. We'll focus on Gaza because I want to track through your argument in your book. But one thing I would just point out is that the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza are connected in at least 2 senses. For one, it's clear which side of those conflicts you should be on if you...
Oh, God, no, not the... I'm not going to be able to watch this. Gaza... The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is legitimately steeped in tons of both sides' history, and you can make very compelling arguments for why both sides fight for the reasons that they do. Ukraine and Russia are not even remotely comparable. Ukraine-Russia is boring compared to Israel-Palestine because it is so obvious and clear what the good guy and the bad guy is. That is a crazy statement to say that it's just as obvious in one as it is in the other, who you should be supporting, but...
2 senses. For one, it's clear which side of those conflicts you should be on if you want to be defending the West and open societies and liberal democracies against their enemies. And secondly, Vladimir Putin is on the wrong side of both of these conflicts. And Joe and Dave couldn't seem to untangle that. And I just think it's worth noting. So,
by the way, there's an additional problem there, which is that I'm supportive of both countries' rights to self-defense. And unfortunately, because of the degradation of the age and the decision to make politics almost entirely a team sport, whereas a part of, on the American right, there's almost, certainly on the mainstream Congress, Senate and so on, there's mainstream support for the Israelis in their war against Hamas. There's increasingly contempt for the right of the Ukrainians to defend themselves against Putin. And the opposite exists on the left. So the left increasingly believes that Israel does not have the right to defend itself, but the Ukraine does. So I suppose I find myself, in the words of Richard Strauss's librettist in Capriccio, I find myself burning between two fires. You know?
Yeah, well, I'm going to try to push you into the rightward fire a little bit because I think you have a problem there. Honestly, I think you have some unfortunate company that, it's just a matter of time before it becomes too uncomfortable to not notice the differences of opinion. And Ukraine is obviously a very sore point, but I think it also is worth worrying about the level of anti-Semitism on the right. And, and much of the confusion what you saw from, had you read the comments, you would have seen a tsunami of confusion coming from Joe's audience. And much of that audience is not maybe 90% of it is kind of rightward leaning, if not fully in Trumpistan. It's definitely not the AOC supporting leftward confusion. Yeah. But let's talk about expertise. So I have some notes here because I find it's all very clear in my mind, but I find that whenever I talk about this, I fail to track it through systematically enough for people to have their doubts removed. So the first point I think we need to make is that everyone acknowledges, whether they want to or not, everyone acknowledges the reality of expertise and its importance. And this is a point I think you've made before, and I've made it as well in response to the aftermath of your podcast with Joe. That, if you put someone in front of Joe who wants to talk about MMA as though they were an expert, as though they knew something, and they knew next to nothing, very, very quickly, Joe would recognize the problem there and begin to turn down the screws, and it would be excruciating. Right? There's no way you can pretend to know about MMA sitting in front of Joe Rogan when in fact you don't. Or everyone, when they get on an airplane, wants their pilot to be a real pilot, not just one who's LARPing as a pilot or who's self-taught, in a simulator.
What if it's a woman?
They have at home. Unless they don't want to land the plane, right? In which case, unless they're jihadists, but let's leave that aside.
If you go in for brain surgery and just before you're wheeled into the operating theatre, comic Dave Smith appears and says, "I'm doing the task."
Yeah. I'm not an expert, but
I never claimed to be an expert, but I am carrying out the operation.
Yes, yeah. I've got a free 4 hours. I'll be inside your head. Okay, so it's just simply indisputable that there's in any domain that matters, and certainly in any domain that purports to be in touch with reality, any side of it, whether it's journalism, history, science, or just how to get things done, just physically, whether you're a plumber or not a plumber, right? The difference between knowing something or knowing nearly everything and knowing nothing is extraordinary, and it matters insofar as the topic matters.
Yep.
So in that context, you can see that a consensus among experts is rather often meaningful, right? So if you have the lone person who's going against the consensus, if 99% of the specialists in a field believe X, and you've got somebody believing Y, maybe somebody who is himself an expert, he has the right credentials. But certainly in the case of someone who isn't an expert and doesn't have the right credentials, it is more often than not the case that you're not in the presence of a lone genius who's just figured everything out on his own. You're very likely in the presence of somebody who's mistaken or a crank or otherwise has some incentive that is going undetected, and they're going against the mainstream for bad reasons. Now, that's not to say there's no such thing as there being a lone genius who does overturn a field of knowledge.
Sometimes it's Galileo.
Yeah. So, but if you had to walk into a casino and bet on
one thing that I don't know what the formal word for this is, but one thing that I think is a useful heuristic to figure out if somebody is completely full of shit or not is when somebody is doing a thing that is exceptional, but not necessarily wrong, but doesn't recognize and verbally, explicitly recognize the exceptionality of what they're doing. Because sometimes the fact that you're not even capable of recognizing how exceptional what you're doing is, that should show you that you're not qualified to speak on the particular thing. So one example of this might be when you talk about certain social niceties, say it's like shaking hands or wearing a certain type of clothing at a certain type of event, right? If you decide that you want to break with convention, then that's fine. And you might even have a good reason for breaking with convention. But if you're going to break with the convention and then not even seem to acknowledge that you're breaking from convention or not understand that you're breaking from convention, well, then you're probably just fucking crazy, right? So I think that's a pretty useful heuristic where if somebody is saying something that is in total opposition to everybody in a field or it just seems very out of place and they can't even seem to acknowledge that, or they seem unwilling to, or they're making weird excuses. They're geniuses have these breakthroughs all the time, rather than an intense statement of kind of humility or an acknowledgement okay, I know this is kind of crazy. This isn't my field, or I don't know, I'm not published here or whatever. So I'm making a pretty, wild claim, but here's the reasons why I believe what I believe in. I think that should be a red flag always.
Prevailing opinion in any field, you would be right to bet on what 99% of oncologists think about this cancer rather than your your uncle who just has strong opinions about cancer, right? And that's to say, and that's just a probabilistic bet we all place every day whenever we're granting credence to knowledge claims. And we're always tending to go with the mainstream consensus of specialists. And that's because expertise really is a thing and probability really is a thing.
Well, I agree with, however, as you probably know, a significant caveat, which is that, as I've said for a long time, one of the things that COVID did was it stripped us of the consensus that the scientists were the last sort of cathedral of knowledge that you really did listen to.
Yeah.
And I said a long time ago about this, that, once trust the science wasn't respected anymore, for some good reasons, we were completely stripped of anything in our society that we could trust.
Yep.
But this is broken, because what you should be able to acknowledge is sometimes a thing can make it. Let's play his game, because I don't know if he's an anti-vaxxer or whatever the fuck, but let's play his game and assume that science made a huge fucking mistake relating to the COVID stuff. Just because something fucks up doesn't mean that thing is necessarily completely and totally untrustworthy. Like, you can analyze why a particular thing is fucked up, and then just try to avoid the circumstances that led to it being fucked up for next time, Like, let's say that it is the case that you've got a loved person and they end up killing somebody, okay? You've got a husband or a wife and they murder somebody, okay? Well, if somebody shows you they have the capacity to kill somebody or murder somebody, right? It's like, well, this is very bad. You probably don't want to spend any time with this person, right? So you wouldn't. You break up with them. You'd probably report on the police, whatever. Let's say that you find out, though, that this person, was held at gunpoint, that the actual person manipulating them told them, I'm going to find and kill your entire fucking family if you don't, go and shoot this person. Well, if you find out all these other circumstances surrounding this, particular event, you would look at it and go, okay, well, obviously it's not good that my significant other killed somebody, but there was a set of circumstances that brought this about, right? This type of coercion. I don't expect these circumstances to ever be repeated in the future. So this isn't like a thing that I'm going to have that weighs on them for the rest of their lives. That's an extreme example, but you can think of other hypotheticals like that. If somebody made a mistake or fucked up once, like if we're assuming that like science got the COVID shit wrong, and science has gotten a lot of stuff wrong, by the way, historically, like that's kind of what the process of science is. It gets a lot of stuff wrong sometimes. The idea that you would then just say, we're going to discount it entirely because of that, that's nonsense. That doesn't make any, that's not, I don't know.
If you said trust the media, although there's great things in the media, but if you said trust the media, increasingly people would laugh, because much of the media would let itself down in the realm of facts and unacknowledged biases.
Yeah.
If you said trust the politicians.
I see this. Apparently Hegseth said to have shared attack details in Second Signal chat. The defense secretary sent sensitive information about strikes in Yemen to an encrypted group chat that included his wife and brother. People familiar with the matter said based. No one is going to do anything, though. Good times.
Well, that's been a laugh line for quite some time.
Yeah. I think generally that every time there's a poll of public opinions about who they trust more, I think journalists are somewhere beneath hookers and politicians beneath us.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's but the breakdown of the science trust was devastating, and I think that the breakdown of belief in almost everything in the state, every arm of government, and the attributing of the most appalling actions to parts of the security state, for instance, having somebody like RFK Jr. saying that that the evidence that the CIA killed his uncle was overwhelming.
Right.
Well, that means that the CIA can kill presidents, which means that you're in a country with a completely rogue intelligence service, and just all of this added on to it. But the COVID thing was the last cathedral to fall. It made science fall, it seems to me. But
I would argue, and this was tacit in some of the things you were saying, whether it was just the fact that you were there saying it, I would argue Joe has more than his fair share of responsibility for that. And alternative media in general, but big podcasts in general, but Joe above all, given his taste for conspiracy thinking and given the lessons he has drawn from COVID. I mean, I share your concern about the failure of institutions and the obviously the woke ideological capture of so many mainstream institutions.
Not the wokies.
Distorted scientific communication is certainly distorted journalism, and it has predictably and to a degree that's intolerable destroyed trust in those institutions.
Yep.
But the remedy for all of that is not mere contrarian anti-establishment know-nothingism,
sure.
Or much less a disavowal of expertise. Oh. It's real expertise, real science, real journalism being aimed at the correct targets, shorn of the dumb ideology that distorted that conversation in the first place.
Yes, and by the way, there's a sort of delineation that's important to make as well, which is I think that part of the confusion that I'm told has been occurring is, of course, that I think that there are probably realms in our society, STEM, so on, which is just easier to shore up. If you just make sure that STEM subjects are as protected as possible from wild ideological outside influence, it sort of feels easier.
Although even you...
Like that statement, and I understand Dave Murray more now, unfortunately, it's a very, the term I've used a lot in the past is scientism. It's a very scientism-esque take to where you're like, okay, we need to keep these pesky humanities and liberal arts cuckedness out of our pure scientific discipline fields, because in the scientific disciplines, there's absolutely no bias and no room for weird, cringy, whatever, errors. And it's like, you realize that a lot of STEM stuff in the past has had hardcore ideological influence. Like every researcher brings with them some form of ideological influence when they're doing research. Like that's impossible unless you're having literal robots doing research. But even in that case, even those robots are going to be subject to influences because they're going to be trained on data sets of humans. So this idea that you can somehow escape all bias by like phrenology that's technically a hard science, right? It's biology, I don't know, it's cringe.
Had some. I think it was the Smithsonian Institute was declared that the math was white supremacist. The notion of objectivity. And,
I charted this in math.
Having a right answer. Yeah.
Absolutely, don't think that it'll stop at STEM. But STEM seems to me is more. It could be more disciplined in order to just push that out. It's easier to see how that happened. How do you do that in the humanities, including the study of history? It's somewhat harder, and I think that is the case.
Yeah, sure.
And I think that is somewhere where, let alone with journalism and current events, I think that there is probably a hard...
And you have this issue as well, to where people think of science as, okay, science is this very rigid world. It's peer reviewed. You've got all these people publishing stuff and correcting papers and engineering and all this stuff. And history is when like a bunch of like wokey retards go into a room and they have a big kumbaya and they talk about like how epic and cute it would be for, some historically revisionist concept of, I don't know, white supremacy or some bullshit. Like, oh, this will be so cool. But like, history has a discipline as well. I don't know if he's ever spoken to a historian before, like a real one, or asked him about the process of, how you put together a historiography or what historical research looks like. It's not just this arbitrary, whimsical world of random bullshit. Like, that's just not the case.
Harder way for people to pass what expertise would look like. But as I said in my column in the New York Post today, although journalism has been significantly deracinated of late, we do still have rules. Yeah. I mean, one rule, for instance, is that if you are writing from a country, you are in the country.
Right.
You're not allowed.
You don't have a VPN that's sending you through.
You're not allowed to sit in West Palm Beach pretending to be on the front lines of the Ukraine conflict.
Right.
And a friend of mine who I do listen to said to me after that podcast, maybe you were too annoyed with the lack of any credentials of comic Dave Smith, and were just angry that you needed to show that you were right and he was wrong. And I said, well, of course that. But I said that the real thing is just that simply on a journalist.
In your way, what is the best way, or in your mind, what is the best way forward for the Dems in midterms? I feel like they should have already started hyper-aggressively campaigning. It feels like they're waiting for something first. Dog, nobody campaigns this early. It's going to be years before, it's going to be over a year before we even hear about the midterms that much. Nobody campaigns this early, okay? Chill, calm down. Everybody's like, what are we doing? What are we doing? We're doing nothing, because we're nowhere near an election right now, okay? Chill. Jesus.
Show that you were right and he was wrong. And I said, well, of course that. But I said that the real thing is just that simply on a journalistic level, if you haven't spent your time on the ground somewhere, your ability to write about it, or the likelihood that your readers will read about it, is very significantly diminished. And I can't say that I don't resent, rather, spending so much of my life on the ground in places, going through the things that my readers know I go through, but I don't go on about, only to be told that my witness, my testimony, my evidence is to be compared with somebody who has never gone further than Wikipedia in their sourcing, or I did the research about the region.
Right.
It seems rather galling to me.
Well, this was a genuinely confusing point.
See, like even on this, and I know it's become like the new, like Wikipedia is like the popular meme talking point, I guess. But the issue for a lot of these people isn't Wikipedia at all. Like Dave Smith doesn't get his information from Wikipedia. I think just from listening to Dave Smith read, Dave Smith seems like he reads books. He reads conspiracy books. Dave Smith sounds like a guy who is actually reading about the things he's talking about, but he's reading books that are like explicitly written from a conspiratorial point of view. That's why every time he seems like informed on a topic, and every time he wants to talk about a particular thing, he's always saying like, this is why the head of the CIA said this. This is why this president said this. He's always speaking in these quotes. And I think it's because he's grabbing quotes from these conspiratorial books. I think that's where Dave Smith gets most of his info from. But that's not a Wikipedia problem. That's another source selection problem,
Right, because, so then now I'm bending over backwards to be charitable to Dave Smith, who I notice rarely makes the effort in my direction or yours. When you were saying to him, I mean, you're basically shaming him for pretending to know what was going on in Gaza without ever having been there. Yeah. And it was quite natural for you to do that, because the point you were making really would have been resolved had he been there, because what became clear in the conversation was he was reading into certain phrases like blockade or concentration camp or open air prison, a notion that life was such, pre-war in Gaza, as to be completely intolerable. And you said, well, were you ever there? Did you ever see what life in Gaza was like a few years ago? And no, he's never been to the region. And so it was relevant to make that point. But on his side, he was wanted to argue, and generically I agree with this, that you need not, in order to judge the ethics of a war, right, provided you are actually in touch with the facts about it and you're reading good sources and you know what is actually happening, you can judge the ethics and you can know who's on the moral high ground without ever having been to either of the respective countries, right? Like you could obviously judge. We could be talking about a war that happened 100 years ago, and be scholars of that conflict. And the burden is not upon either of us to have been to the region.
Well, that was a rather lame point that Comic Dave Smith tried to make, which is he said,
Comic Dave Smith.
I haven't been to Nazi Germany either, but can I not have views about that?
Yeah.
As I pointed out to him.
He does have views about that.
He does. So he does have views about that. But I said, yeah, but you can't time travel, but you can travel.
Yeah.
And this is, to me, quite an important point, which is that if the reason why it matters in the now is if you were litigating a foreign conflict or a domestic conflict that happened 100 years ago, much, if not all of the dust would have settled, you'd be able to get a rounded view of what was happening, what had gone on, and be able to reflect on it. When it's something that is happening now, the dust is not settled by any means, literal or metaphorical, and the consensus view has not emerged. And much, if not most, of the reporting and what comes out of the region is wildly off. So I don't think it is possible, actually, to simply rely on some published sources. No, I don't think that at all. And I think it is the duty of somebody commenting on such a thing to go and see it firsthand, and that is a journalistic standard. But there we get into the follow-on problem, which is the shapeshifter thing. And I'm not talking about the language in which the far right talks about the Jews. The shapeshifter thing, which I was also trying to fight in that conversation, is I never said I was a historian.
Yeah, I just spent 5 hours on television this week declaiming about the topic.
I merely, when people introduce me as a historian, I don't demur from the introduction. And if somebody introduces me as the world's greatest living historian, I don't say,
now you're talking about Daryl Cooper. Yeah.
But if you were to have, at the beginning of this podcast, introduced me as the world's leading engineer of suspension bridges, Douglas Murray, I think I might have. Don't. But if I started to speak as if I was that, at some point you are pretending to be that. If you keep being introduced as a historian, but then you have the move of saying, I never said I was a historian. If you keep saying, I'm a comedian, but I'm not, I'm a commentator on a particularly febrile foreign conflict, and then you say, but you don't know about this, and you go, well, I'm just a comedian. And you play these endless games of assertion of knowledge, followed by, if you get caught, okay, I don't know about this. This is a very, very annoying rhetorical trick that some of us have observed, because it means you can never be pinned down.
Yeah.
Because you're always shifting your presentation of who you are. It was one of the things that always made me most irritated about Russell Brand, who I've never wanted to debate with or discuss with, because I always saw him doing this, that he would indeed 20 years ago go on the BBC, announce the need for revolution, and explain how we need to completely change the system of global finance. He would get shown a chart, and he would say, I ain't got time for no chart, I'm a comedian.
Right. Yeah.
This is a very annoying move. Jon Stewart used to do it as well.
True.
Well, it's tennis without the net, and you find you can hit the ball rather hard when there's no net.
Jon Stewart had a semi-legitimate excuse for it, though, which is I don't think anybody realized how much all of our political education in America was basically just shifting towards comedians back then, right?
Right.
Yeah, and sometimes your rackets are made of jelly. I mean, it's sort of just endlessly absurd. What are they doing in this thing? Why the constant shifting? It's for people to work out what's going on there.
But the problem is that you're in front of an audience, and Joe has cultivated this audience, and perhaps been in turn changed by this audience that is anchored to some very strong, if unacknowledged, claims about the nature of knowledge and authority, and also certain moral principles. I mean, so for instance, I saw at least two heuristics running in the background of that conversation. One is sunlight is the best disinfectant, and for sunlight, by sunlight I mean let's just turn on the microphones and talk at length, right? So there can be nothing intrinsically, there can be nothing wrong, and only goodness in sitting across the table from someone like Daryl Cooper, who is an amateur, self-taught historian, talented podcaster who has, as you pointed out, an appetite for contrarian taboo history of the David Irving flavor about the Holocaust. Nothing wrong with Joe just sitting with him for 4 hours and midwifing a conversation from him that...
When they say, I never said I'm an expert, the counter should be, but you want your opinion taken seriously, or you want to be treated as an authoritative source on knowledge on X. No, they'll just play dumb. They'll be like, I'm not saying people should necessarily believe me. I always tell people to do their own research. I tell people, like, hey, go read a book on this, or I recommend, go read this, go do your own research. I'm just here to talk about it because somebody asked me, blah, 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 basically.
Which at no point entails Joe pulling him up short on any of the points he's making. He's simply receiving this person's expertise, even while if you pushed and said, but are you really a historian? He'd say, no, I'm just I'm a podcaster, I'm a fan of history. But the assumption is, and again, this is the assumption from Joe's audience, is that there can be nothing wrong with this. If you're talking for hours, people are going to recognize what is true. You're trusting your audience to know what is true. And it is just an obvious fact that you cannot trust Joe or his audience to know when an already debunked David Irving talking point is being recycled in front of him, unless he's done the homework to know what he's actually in dialogue with.
Well, if I can say so, there are also two other things going on there. One is, I suspect that what you describe as sort of viewer aggravation with appeals to expertise or indeed defense of expertise feels like a personal assault on a large number of listeners, because they feel like they're doing that, and
it's
they like to do that.
It's elitism.
Yeah. But because they...
I would be very careful. Remember, you have to qualify all of these things a lot. People don't actually exhibit what I would say is like this distrust of elites or experts. There's a different algorithm running here, because if an elite or an expert comes out and they agree with their position, all of a sudden they champion that elite, right? Like you'll hear tons of people around the COVID time talk about how they didn't like, Fauci or, doctors or, the medical establishment, but they loved it when a doctor, the weird guys from the COVID Frontline Alliance or whatever, or the Dr. Robert Malone guy, when doctors would come out and agree with them, they would love it. So there's something a little bit more sophisticated. There's something a little bit more complicated running there in their brain than just, oh, I hate the elites. It's like, I hate people that disagree with me. And if they are an elite, then I'll just use that as a way to kind of shoo them away.
They'd like to do that. They're kind of doing that by listening to long-form podcasting and developing views. Again, they are welcome to do that. I'm all for that. But the point that I keep trying to bring across is that you can still hold on to the principle of truth, of standards, and much more. And the second thing is, I think there is a very obvious algorithmic excuse for this, which is that if you do a podcast in which you say Adolf Hitler was bad, definitely a bad guy of World War II, and Churchill was a hero, the algorithm doesn't favor you.
Yeah.
Whereas if you say, aha, I've got this fantastic new view on it, which is that Hitler was trying not to be at all anti-Semitic in the 1930s, he was keeping the whole stuff down, and then he just sort of, but he had his reasons to dislike the Jews, and I'm going to get into those in the next podcast, and that sort of thing, you
forgot the part that there was no intention to kill the Jews. They just found that they couldn't feed them once they rounded them all up. So it was more compassionate to
stuff like
put them to death.
Stuff like
Might
this.
it not be more compassionate to euthanize them?
And that, unfortunately, that's what certain people are doing and pushing. And I was genuinely, I said at the end, I said to Dave, who I think he says he has a Jewish grandfather, so I think he probably wouldn't be regarded as Jewish in a very orthodox way, but he'd certainly be caught by the Nuremberg laws.
Right.
And Hamas would certainly regard him as full-blown.
Okay, I'm careful, and this guy probably knows more about this than me, but that idea of like the obsession with like the mom is the thing that makes you Jewish or whatever, I've never heard that from any like Israeli circles. Like it's kind of a thing, but I'm pretty sure you would get accepted into almost all sects of, like, I know you could birthright all of that shit if you wanted to. I know that you could probably move into like a settlement community or whatever. Maybe the really ultra super Orthodox ones or something would, but I feel like for the most part, I don't think there's a huge obsession with like the mother's side. Or if it is, I miss it, I guess.
Fully Jewish. The complete catastrophe, as Tom Stoppard memorably, incredibly describes it. But people like him who are doing this, I just warned him. I said, you must know, because he said something like, there's this sort of fertile ground. I said, you're doing the watering of it. You're watering this. You're bringing it up. You're conspicuously engaged in the process of trying to grow an extremely poisonous tree. And it's going to get you, and then all of us, by which I mean, of course, you encourage the most ugly, debunked, destructive bigotries of human history. And they are always ones which, once they flourish and once they grow, burn everyone.
Yep.
Yeah, so the crucial point is that you were not saying that Dave Smith couldn't possibly be right because he's a non-expert.
No.
You're saying that he's a non-expert, and it shows because he's making obvious errors. And so it is with Daryl Cooper, and so it is with any of these people getting the platform, right? And so it's not the consequence of being a non-expert in this case is that these guys are trafficking in recognizable distortions of fact and coming to the wrong moral conclusions as a result. And then a very easy way to summarize that problem is, listen, you're talking to people who are non-experts. Why not talk to the experts? That's not to deny the fact that people are entitled to...
He isn't talking about Jewish perceptions. He's talking about anti-Semites' perceptions of people with some Jewish heritage, bro. There is no anti-Semite anywhere on the entire fucking face of the earth that will hate you less if you're just like Jewish on your dad's side. Unless I don't know what anti-Semites you're talking to, but...
their own opinions, that sometimes someone can be self-taught and actually make a valid contribution to knowledge.
Absolutely.
And to flip it around, it's also the case that arguments from authority are illegitimate, and nothing is true simply because a consensus of Nobel laureates says it is. It's just that a consensus of Nobel laureates is often a very good guide to the best state of the evidence, right? I mean, that's shorthand for finding the best evidence and the best arguments.
Sure. By the way, I just would say one other thing, which is that
That's what he said, I think. Okay.
I think a lot of people aren't aware of, but...
I don't even know if I don't think I was necessarily disagreeing with anything he said. I was just saying that I hear that mom thing brought up a lot, but I don't think most people give a fuck. I don't think I was trying to contradict anything he said.
I do believe that when something becomes very fetid on what is roughly your political side, you should call it out, identify it. It's very difficult to do this, of course, at the moment, because there is a movement on the right in America and elsewhere which says that anything that is gatekeeping is demonstrably bad, and therefore let's lift all of the sewer sluices, and let all the shit run. And I think it's worth identifying one other thing, which I don't know, you're probably aware of, but a lot of people aren't, which is that there has always been a reason why a type of American right-wing figure will play with this stuff, and it's slightly different to the reason why you get the same stuff on, for instance, the continent of Europe. On the continent of Europe, when this dark game is played about World War II, what they try to do is they demonstrate they cannot contend with the utter atrocity of Nazi fascism, and try in the end to either downplay it and outplay Soviet communism in some zero-sum game, which is never going to end well, try to get around the mountain of the Holocaust, and in the end find a way to absolve their country's history of this. And I understand this, but it's also lamentable because they have to contend with the histories of collaboration and fascism and much more. One of the reasons, again, why, in an incredibly British way, I reassert that the fact that some of us, historically, our countries didn't do that. So I have the right to feel some pride for that.
Yeah.
But the thing on the American right that's always existed on this is that that World War II was a catastrophe to enter into, as was World War I, because America should have let the Nazis and the Soviets battle it out, and we didn't need to get involved. And that's the dream. I mean, I still, it's that itself is an interesting revisionist exercise. It's one that's happened for years. I saw Pat Buchanan argue this years ago when he had a book out, very unconvincingly, but it was stimulating in a way, and stimulating to see him prove wrong. But in any case, that's a game, because as Clive James used to say, we're here because history happened. There's a sort of limit to which you can play this book. So why do you want to play it? You want to play that dark game because you want to get onto a different game now.
Yeah. There's also, I don't know if you have the same degree of conspiracy thinking in the continental version of this. I mean, yes, the Jews are often at the bottom of many conspiracy theories going back over 100 years, but it seems to me that there's an appetite for conspiracy thinking in America now. Again, I locate the epicenter of this somewhere near Joe's podcast, unfortunately. It's just, I mean, it is being algorithmically boosted to a degree that it seems in danger of subsuming everything else.
It's a disaster. It's a complete disaster because, of course, people need to hold in their heads the thing that some things that are called conspiracy theories turn out to be true.
Right. Yes.
The COVID lab leak, obvious example. In recent time, it fell apart in recent time. But when you look at the fact that, for instance, a majority of Americans believe the CIA was involved in the assassination of JFK, President Trump releases the last JFK files, and to the amazement of many, it seems that the man who the Dallas police fingered for this a few hours after the assassination of the president might have actually done it. Was the person who did it. And the man, then Lee Harvey Oswald, who had a gun that his wife noticed was missing that morning from the house, and who, when the police come to her house, say, was it my husband who did it? It seems to be probably Lee Harvey that did it. And that the one member staff of the book depository who was heard to be firing rounds on the floor above and was the only person to run out of the book depository immediately after the shooting may have done the shooting.
Yeah. And the shooting, which supposedly was impossible for one man to accomplish, but has been replicated by several shooters.
That no sharpshooter could possibly do this, but it's demonstrated. And Lee Harvey Oswald was a practiced sharpshooter. Right. But it just goes on and on. But my point is simply that I made this point a little while ago about Bobby Kennedy Jr., which is I said, if I was living in a country where I honestly believed that my father and my uncle, two of the most important people in the country, had been assassinated by the government, I think I'd hot-footed out of the country quite fast. I think it's a dangerous place to be. I think that so that's just one, but you can do this on multiple areas of American public life. Look, America is the only country where the citizens are encouraged to generate conspiracy theories about America's successes. Look at the moon landing, one of the great successes of American engineering and exploration. And significant chunks of the American public do not believe that America did this. Yeah. And one of the things, by the way, that's fascinating about that is if you speak to Russians who grew up under Soviet communism, where you were lied to about everything, everything was a lie. This year's crops are particularly good, always a lie. But even in that world of lies, They didn't think that Yuri Gagarin didn't go up into space.
Because it needs to go to the New York Times right now. I see it. I've seen it. What do you want me to say? It's bad. They shouldn't be leaking shit on Signal. I don't think anything's going to happen. It's another Signal thing. There's nothing to cover. I do not do breaking news. I don't know why people still don't understand this. I don't do breaking news ever. I hate breaking news. It's the most boring fucking thing in the universe to me. Okay? Find out what happens tomorrow. Nothing's going to change between now and then. If you want to watch it, go read the breaking storage. There's another Signal chat leak. It's retarded. Or I don't know if it's been leaked yet. There's just people saying that they're still on Signal chat. Yeah, no shit.
They were proud of it, and they wanted it to be the case. So I do think, and I know now I can predict there will be a flurry of, you haven't seen the way in which the flag holds up, and
the shadows are in the wrong direction.
Shadows are in the wrong direction, and all this. I can imagine the inbox now. But
Joe used to be one of those guys.
And I gather he reversed course because he ended up recognizing that America couldn't have got away with faking the moon landing because the Soviets would have exposed it.
Yeah, that's a nice counterpoint. All right, so I want to get to your book, and we're not leaving the current topic because the goal here is to make the case that the moral confusion you were up against in that podcast interview is as bewildering as your temper suggested. I mean, it was just that the moral high ground is so obvious here, and the wider concern. I mean, it's one thing to view this as Israel, its specific history with the Palestinians, its right to exist, the legitimacy of Zionism, and get sort of wrapped around the axle of all of those specifics. It's another to actually look at the conflict in Gaza and in Israel's history generally as part of this larger picture of a jihadist and Islamist conflict with the West, which is what I tend to do. Your book doesn't focus on that, but it's important to keep that in view, and it becomes incredibly clear where the moral high ground is when you look at the details. But let me just, before I let you run, I want to point out that there are two very different lenses through which people look at this conflict, and they explain the impossibility of discussion. Because so the lens that certainly Dave Smith and his fans have here is that the extremity of Hamas's violence demonstrates the immensity of Palestinian suffering. I mean, the fact that they would behave this way it can only be attributed to the fact that they've been pushed past the point of sanity by the Israelis. Right? So in some strange way, the onus for the atrocities of October 7th and other atrocities, the sort that you saw during the Second Intifada, and this reasoning gets mapped onto jihadist atrocities everywhere, the onus gets put on the victims of the atrocities. And this is a point that Paul Berman made brilliantly 20 years ago in his book, Terror and Liberalism. So there's that weird distortion. The opposite way of seeing this, and I'm convinced and have been convinced for more than 20 years is the true one, is that
if you go back, they both believe lab leak is correct. Yeah, the Dave Smith, or not Dave Smith, the Murray guy seems to be fully bought into the idea that the lab leak thing is just 100% true for whatever reason. I don't know why. I don't know. Don't care. It wouldn't surprise me if Sam Harris agreed with that.
That jihadism is an independent variable, and you can find this death cult behavior in people who have been immiserated by occupations and been treated badly, and you can find it in people who have not been immiserated. Yeah. And so it's the ideas that give you the death cult. And conversely, you can find people who have been treated far worse than the Palestinians, and they never manufacture an endless supply of suicide bombers. Yeah. So it's the ideas, it's the culture, the most glaring scotoma in Dave Smith's non-expertise is a complete failure to appreciate the reality of jihadism and just what Israel is actually dealing with in Hamas.
I believe that it's also a strain of anti-Americanism and anti-Westernism, which is a belief that nobody in the world can do something wrong and bad unless we have somehow pushed them to it.
Yes, this is Noam Chomsky's gift to our politics.
Yes. It used to be on the left, and now it's on the right as well. Yeah. It's a profound and deep anti-Americanism, which I cannot sign up for, and will not. Profound anti-Westernism. Sees the world. Actually, funnily enough, Edward Said, to the extent that his theory on Orientalism holds at all, might have found this trend in...
What do you believe in based on what regarding lab leak versus wet market? My understanding is up to this point, all of the scientific research points towards the market. And there hasn't been anything new scientifically that's been published pointing to a lab leak. That's my understanding, that no new information has come out about that. There have been a few governments that, for whatever reason, have published saying that they think that there would, I think it was a U.S. one recently that said with low probability that it came from the lab, but it's all based on, I think they even say it's just based on evaluating like old information. It's not because anything new has come out, but that's my understanding.
Interesting. Of Westerners now looking at the rest of the world and saying they can't do anything unless we make them.
Right.
Totally without any
robs agency of all the people you would otherwise
no moral agency. Yeah. And if there is an explanation for why somebody goes and blows themselves up and everyone that they can kill on a bus in Jerusalem, it's because of something to do with British mandate policy 80 years earlier. I completely reject this, and I reject it for many reasons. But one is that riding shotgun with the claim that only the West, only America can lead anyone to do bad things is what you rightly identify, Sam, as the utter inability to recognize that some people seek utterly different things than we do. You remember there was a story some years ago that seemed to me to be emblematic. I must look it up again. I think it was actually reported in the New York Times of an American couple. It's a nice couple. I don't wish to make any sort of laughs at their expense, but they decided to give up their jobs somewhere in San Francisco and cycle around the world. And they kept a blog, and the aim was that they wanted to show their belief that essentially everyone in the world wants what they did, which is, security, comfort, well-being, happiness, a bit of money to bring up your kids well, and, love and peace. And their journey log ends when they're cycling through, I think, Uzbekistan, and unfortunately for them, a truckload of ISIS fighters are driving the other way. I can't believe their luck that there were these two Americans on a tandem and stop and torture and kill them. And there's where their story ended. I use it as an example because it's a particularly unpleasant one, but emblematic of a total failure of imagination or study from many people in the West who do not realize that when it comes to what I'd call the death cult ideology, which is manifested on the right and the left in history, it manifested in Spain in the 1930s with the Francoists chanting to Miguel de Unamuno, Viva la muerte, long live death. And, the great Spanish philosopher of his era realizes his work is just done because it's over, because he's at a university in front of a group of young men chanting long live death, and it's over. Reason and rationalism will no longer work. Well, the death cult that I write about here is a death cult of Hamas that really could have not done what it did. And as I say in one of the passages in the book, after Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005, there was a Palestinian state in Gaza. They were even encouraged to have elections by the George W. Bush administration, Condoleezza Rice and others. They had elections. They voted in Hamas, which states that it's a genocidal terrorist organization which wants the annihilation of the Jewish race and then get on to everyone else.
I don't know. I don't care. I don't care about either of these people. You know what? Palestinians and Israelis, they deserve each other. That's what I think. I'm just trying to figure out if I truly am the smartest, just the best person in the fucking history of all of the planet, or if I've just missed something, right? I'm being honest, right? I don't know why I seem to be one of the only people that can do this or have this take, which is in opposition to so many other people who this guy probably knows more than me, I would imagine. But I've said this is always my complaint. Every single time somebody brings up Israel-Palestine, they always have one-sided retellings of history. It's always one side and that's it, right? I don't know why everybody has to do this.
The George W. Bush administration, Condoleezza Rice and others, they had elections. They voted in Hamas.
The reason why they voted in Hamas is because the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip felt like the other side hadn't gotten anything done. The Oslo Accords and then the renegotiated Oslo II fucking failed. Okay, the second Intifada began, violence erupted all over Israel, lots of Palestinian terrorist attacks on Israelis, and the Palestinians, especially those in the Gaza Strip, felt like none of the more moderate voices were doing anything to further the Palestinian cause. And eventually they started to support more radical voices. That voice in the Gaza Strip ended up being Hamas. This is the source of this. It's not like they just randomly voted for him because, death cult, Islamic death cult, it's Islam death cult. Like, there was a reason why, like in the United States right now, we voted for Trump, who's more radical because people had the feeling, at least, that shit wasn't going well. It's not just, this shit isn't random. It doesn't come out of fucking nowhere. I don't know why nobody ever voices where any of these things come from, but whatever.
By the George W. Bush administration, Condoleezza Rice and others, they had elections. They voted in Hamas, which states that it's a genocidal terrorist organization which wants the annihilation of the Jewish race and then get on to everyone else. They voted in Hamas. Hamas immediately used the billions of dollars that came in to make sure they built up a terror infrastructure, tunnel systems, not for the citizens of Gaza, but for the rockets and for their fighters, kept on importing rockets and other military hardware to fire at Israel. And after many iterations of the war in 2023, 4,000 of their terrorists flood into Israel and massacre their way through the south. This is the fruit of Hamas. This is what Hamas wanted. This is what its leadership wanted.
How would you be able to counter it if the moderates truly did not get anything done? The reality is that both sides were probably fucking around in the Oslo 1 and 2 process a little bit. Arafat just could never bring himself to commit to a position of nonviolence. Arafat could never bring himself to commit to telling everybody to calm the fuck down, and that terrorist attacks and the constant military actions against Israel were improper. Because Arafat was born out of military conflict. That's what he got famous for when the PLO fought against Israel's incursion into Jordan in the 60s, I think. So when the PLO started, there was a huge battle where it was really the Jordanian, I think, military fought back the Israelis, but they let the Palestinians take credit for it. I think Arafat was involved in some of that fighting, and he became like the symbolic leader of the Palestinians for finally winning a military fight against Israel. But the Arafat couldn't commit to a position of nonviolence ever for the Palestinians. And on the Israeli side, they probably could have done more to, even though during Oslo 1 and 2, there wasn't a formal agreement not to expand settlements, they continued to expand settlements a ton. And then you also had your big terrorist attacks, sometimes that were even coming from the Israelis. The Palestinians did a lot of terrorist attacks, but you got big terror attacks sometimes from Israelis too. That super ultra Zionist guy, the Goldstein dude who did is it the Cave of the Matriarchs terror attack or whatever, where it was like, was it 50 or 60 people shot or killed? Both sides it was just not good. Like, it's a fraud situation. It's difficult. You have to have like very big leadership, very brave leadership, willing to take huge political risks on both sides. I think Israeli leadership was there for it. I don't think Palestinians ever found their good leader to lead them into that direction. So you just get endless fighting as a result.
And they do not want to live in peace and coexistence. They want to murder and slaughter, and they even want to die themselves. And I think that, we're sitting here in LA. Why would anyone in Los Angeles understand this? You do. But
we had 9/11. We had our own. Insofar as you're a student of the news, this is of a piece with.
Would you argue that it's Israel that should be the bigger person and come to the table since they're the one holding the power? A little bit, but I think Israel in the past has been willing to do that, and the Palestinians have not. The big problem here, though, has to do, I think, initially it was Arab states, but I think those have largely fallen off, kind of. The big problem is this weird international community, this white person fetishization of the Palestinian that allows the Palestinians to have this hope that one day they can conquer all of Israel again. And as long as Palestinians have that hope, they will never come forward and negotiate with Israel. There is no, if you ask the Palestinians, what is your position to negotiate peace? They'll never give you one, because their position is they want all of Israel back. And that's just a fact.
What happened in Paris on multiple occasions, Bataclan most horrifically, in your country, the Manchester bombing. This is just, we memory hole it, and other things, other bright shiny objects capture our attention. But this is, we're talking about, it's the same species of confusion and anti-Western bias that caused people to blame the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists for having the indecency of getting murdered by jihadists, and then you had the PEN America Foundation, rescind the award that they were going to give them, and for courage. This confusion is everywhere. I want to actually just draw a few bright lines where people can see them to show the moral high ground here. So there's just some striking differences between the two sides that you elucidate in your book. One is that one side takes hostages, even young children and old women, and its community, the non-combatants, receive these hostages not with looks of horror, but with open celebration. Right? It's like it is completely intelligible.
I feel like any society behaving the way the Palestinians do without Western coddling would have been obliterated for most of human history. It's only today that this is allowed. Absolutely, that is true, 100%. But they wouldn't get obliterated because their behavior would probably moderate. Like, Palestinian terrorism exists because they know they can get away with it. If there wasn't the coddling from the Western world, they wouldn't behave in that way because they know that they would face utter annihilation for it. But
from a cultural standpoint within Gaza, that this is exactly what you do. This is the good is on your side for stealing these infants and young children and old women and forcing them underground for years at a stretch. One side uses its own civilians as human shields. One side murders its civilians when they try to flee to safety. And if you try to flip this, if you try to imagine the other side, that is the Israelis, doing any of these things, it is obviously unthinkable. And anyone who is standing in criticism of their behavior, I think still wouldn't go so far as to imagine that the people of Tel Aviv are capable of using their own women and children as human shields, right? Or that they would celebrate that the IDF would want to seek to maximize civilian casualties on its own side. Even that is not, as confused as people are. No one seems to be as confused about that, and yet they don't see the relevance of these differences.
Lots of reasons why they don't want to. If you were supporting a side that turned out to have done October the 7th, and some people say to me, oh, no, the world's sympathies were with Israel. No, they weren't. No, some of the world's sympathies were briefly with Israel. But in London on the evening of the 7th, Hundreds of people gathered in the streets of Knightsbridge to wave flares and celebrate the ongoing massacre. On the 8th of October,
Same for Israel, USA cuddling. I'm sorry, but it's just a historical lie. If you want to believe it, I understand why, because Jewish people somehow bring out the deepest levels of ass pain in everybody in all of human history. Israel would have been a superpower without help from the United States. They largely were unassisted by the U.S. until probably 1973. And the Arab states had a ton of support from the Soviets prior to 73 anyway, so Israel probably would have always been there for a variety of reasons.
Related in the book that I was in Times Square to see a pro-Hamas protest as the massacre was still going on. This started very early. And we get back to that strange collection of simultaneous thoughts that people can have. Hamas GoPros and records and Instagrams their atrocities.
To be fair, Palestinian terrorism also exists in part because some concessions were made by Israel as a result of it, i.e. Israeli disengagement in the early 2000s. Israeli disengagement in 2005 was not a negotiation with Arabs. Sharon himself, I think Yossi Beilin told me in Loner Boxes in person. I don't know if this was in the interview or not, but Sharon said he never trusted Arabs, and he would never trust Arabs. That's part of the reason I think why he didn't even bother to make a deal. He said we need to leave because this is going to be the destruction of our country if we continue to fight here forever. He wanted to leave from the West Bank as well. He only got out of the Gaza Strip, but that wasn't a concession. That was a unilateral disengagement. There were no deals made. There were no treaties signed. Sharon was just like, get me the fuck out of here.
And their followers it's another one of these double moves, these jiu-jitsu moves, these, they say simultaneously how thrilled they are about the atrocities, and also the atrocities didn't happen. And that then, the third move is the atrocities are actually carried out by the other side. You set your watch and you'll see it. Last year there was a claim that IDF soldiers had gone into Gaza and were raping.
What is this? The Hasbara accounts are up in arms over this statement displayed at the kneecap seal Coachella performance. Your fake tears mean nothing when we've all seen the genocide you cheer for. Are accounts up in arms about this? Does anybody give a fuck about this? Okay.
The women of Gaza. There are many reasons why this is completely implausible, and not just implausible, but deeply offensive. But all these people who were relating this, repeating this smear of the Israeli Defense Forces, were all the people who were denying that Hamas had raped women on the 7th. There's a muppet of a journalist, not a journalist, a sort of commentator, agitator in the UK, who passed around the libel that the IDF was raping women in Gaza, who, when he saw a version of the 43-minute atrocity video, came out of it and reviewed it by saying it was disappointing because you didn't actually see any women being raped, and therefore it seemed unlikely any rapes occurred. Yeah. This has become, as you know, I call it Grossman's law now, after Vasily Grossman. This is this thing of tell me what you accuse the Jews of and I'll tell you what you're guilty of. It's absolutely 100% application of this law. The side that says it's both good to kill babies and denies that they kill babies, then attack the IDF and IAF for killing babies. It's
kind of, although I would be careful, don't conflate the white Westerners with Hamas. Hamas doesn't make in general, at least I haven't seen Hamas make like cringe soy statements. Like Hamas will usually gig a Chad about murdering civilians or about using human shields. Like Hamas doesn't say like, oh, we don't use human shield. We would never do. Like Hamas just says, yeah, of course we do. Every single Palestinian, every Arab is engaged in jihad against Israel.
It's everywhere, this form of projection, I suppose, which is one of the things it is. And it's deliberate desire to not recognize the difference between deliberately maximizing civilian casualties, as Hamas did on the 7th, and deliberately trying to minimize them, as the IDF has. If the IDF had wanted to carry out a genocide in Gaza, it could have done. They were accused of having a genocide in Gaza since 2005, which is weird because the population doubled after 2005 up to 2023. But then it's not like consistency is particularly important, it seems, in this era. After all, the same people who say that there is a genocide in Gaza are the same people who say, why...
Israel still enjoyed broad support, including military, from other Western countries prior to the 70s, though. To pretend they just settled all their conflict when they got pushed out by Hezbollah from Lebanon is cringe. They got pushed out. That was like 2008? I don't remember when the second Lebanon war was. Or was that 2006? I don't think Israel had broad support. They bought weapons and stuff from people, but it's not like they had formal alliances with Britain or France or anything.
The Israelis realize that they are operating...
Why is Destiny lying and saying Israel would have been a superpower without the U.S.? Because they would have been. They already were. They won their War of Independence. They won 67. 73 is when the U.S. started like major assistance. They would have been a superpower without the United States, for sure. Or I don't know if you say superpower. I don't know if you say superpower now. When you say superpower, do you just mean like nuclear weapons? I'm not sure about that.
Gaza are the same people who say, why don't the Israelis realize that they are operating militarily in an area with a disproportionate number of people under the age of 21?
Yeah, you have a line in your book, forgive me if I don't get it verbatim, but it was something like, how do you fight an army that wants to maximize the loss of life on its own side? Right? I mean, this is,
yes.
I mean, it is, people don't, it seems to me, make contact with how just morally perverse that situation is, but two, what an insuperable obstacle it is to actually practically fighting a war so as to minimize the loss of civilian life.
I mean, hundreds and hundreds of Israeli soldiers have been killed in the last 18 months because they are going methodically and in exceptionally dangerous situations, house to house, in areas of Gaza that are meant to have been cleared of everyone but Hamas fighters. Hundreds and hundreds of young Israeli men, primarily, have been killed by, instead of...
Didn't they also sneak those guns across the border when they weren't supposed to? Sneak those guns across the border? I don't know what the fuck that means. They bought a ton of shit illegally, or they smuggled stuff in from Czechoslovakia, I think for 47 and 48. But I mean, everybody was mind-fucked in the Middle East at that point. I mean...
Carpet bombing an area, going assiduously through it, at enormous personal risk. They have every soldier you speak to has the same stories of, for instance, people coming out of a civilian area with their hands in the air, and then from their midst, a group of Hamas terrorists come dressed exactly the same as the civilians and start firing at the soldiers, in the knowledge that the soldiers either have to just receive the incoming fire and lose their own lives, or they have to fire back and risk killing some of the civilians that Hamas has so gleefully sprung out among. None of this is just... All of this is what every soldier has faced for the last 18 months, every single one. And Hamas's leadership say... There was an interview on Al Arabiya the other month with one of the remaining...
Have you seen the HR 1526 bill that just passed the House that would restrict district judges' ability of providing injunctive relief, effectively giving any... I've heard of it, but I don't care about proposed bills because you can find a billion random, crazy, horrible proposed bills. I don't give a fuck. If a bill is like going to be passed because there's like actual support for it, then I would care more, but there's always a billion crazy, especially in the House. Republicans in the House are fucking insane. These are subhuman people.
Leaders at Hamas, who was asked, if the Israeli airstrikes from the air that you describe are so devastating, why don't you allow the citizens of Gaza to shelter in your very extensive tunnel system? And his reply was, because the tunnel system is not for the civilians of Gaza. The tunnels are for our rockets and ammunition and for our fighters. And asked who should build shelters for the citizens of Gaza, he said the international community. That's their responsibility, the international community. But
right. I have the same community that gave them billions and billions of dollars to build those tunnels effectively over 18 years.
And I have a genuine offer I'll put out there. I can't attach cash prize this time, but it is a completely sincere offer to anyone listening to pick me up on the following challenge. Your listenership, I'm sure, Sam, is intelligent enough to understand what it is to extrapolate out.
Nah, I still don't think they got through the Van Allen belt of radiation to land on that round rock in that tin can from 1969. I'm sticking to it. Do you believe that ICBMs existed in 1969? Well, we could already shoot rockets to other sides of the planet. Why do you think we can't shoot a rocket to the moon? Also, what does the Van Allen belt have to do with not being able to get to the moon?
Out civilian or other casualties by ratio of population. Not everyone gets me on this. But, of course, Israel is a country of 9 million people. America is a country of, what, 340 million people. Nobody knows how many people there are in the UK, so it doesn't work there. But
well, we soon won't know how many people are in America, given all the doging.
So, and again, just preempting any of the morons who want to claim that I'm saying that a Jewish life is worth 10 American lives. No, It's extrapolating out from population. So, if October 7th had happened in America by proportion of population, it would have been 44,000 Americans murdered and burned alive in their homes in one day, and another 10,000 Americans taken hostage. So, my challenge is, whether in Gaza with 1,200 civilians in Israel murdered and 250 taken hostage, and the two stated war aims of the Israeli government, the return of all the hostages and the destruction or capture of all of Hamas's leadership and fighting brigades, whether it's in the case of Israel trying to carry out this operation of rescue and so on in Gaza, or whether it would be how America would get back 10,000 hostages in an equally built-up, intensely booby-trapped terrain.
Booby-trapped.
Anyone watching has a battle plan for how to do that, send it to me, and I will send it to everybody I know in Israel, because I'm sure that if there is a military genius watching and listening who knows how you would carry out that operation with no civilian casualties on the side of the Gazans and minimal to no casualties on the side of the IDF, I can assure anyone watching, I and many others will be all ears. But I hear no such thing. I hear no such thing. The best I've had, I think it came up in that Rogan debate, the best I've heard is the hostages that have been released by getting around a table and negotiating. Horseshit, said by people who don't know what they're talking about. The only reason Hamas has released any of the hostages to date, including the dead bodies of babies, is because of the kinetic military force exercised for 18 months by the young men and women of the IDF. Only military pressure has made Hamas give any of the hostages back. They would all still be sitting in underground tunnels and in the basements of Al Jazeera journalists and much more if there had been no military action in Gaza. Sinwar would still be alive if the IDF had not painstakingly fought in Gaza for a year.
Yeah.
People simply do not understand this. And when they say things like, but why don't the Israelis just get around the table with Hamas? I'm afraid you completely demonstrate you know nothing about Hamas.
Yeah. What do you think Israel's policy should be going forward around hostages? I know this is difficult for you to answer, perhaps given the fact that you know many of these families, but I think I can only imagine that there are very few people in Israel now who think that the Gilad Shalit deal was wise in retrospect. That was you might summarize what that was, but that was I think the 1,027 terrorists to one hostage exchange that freed Sinwar to mastermind October 7th. That piece of history looks increasingly untenable. And given the understandable pressure brought to bear by the hostage families throughout this war, given the fact that the leverage is undeniable. Once you have hostages, you have leverage. How does this get broken in the future?
Let me preempt that by saying that there are similar cases around. When I was reporting from Ukraine recently, I was, among other things, interviewing families and children who had been behind the enemy lines.
God, I hate it when these bongers say Bean instead of Ben. It's Big Ben, not Big Bean. So why can't they just say it correctly?
Territory captured by Putin's forces. And it's thought that around 20,000 Ukrainian children have effectively been kidnapped by Putin and the Russians. This includes people in orphanages, but it also includes children that were encouraged to go to summer camps and their parents sent to summer camps and then were disappeared. I found out something very interesting the other week when I was looking into this story and trying to bring some more light to it, which is that there seems to me to have been an almost deliberate attempt at the Ukrainian side not to maximize this story.
Right.
Because, and this is something of a supposition speaking to some of the people campaigning for the kidnapped children, that the Zelensky government knew that the minute that it is about getting the children back, you will get intolerable pressure from your domestic population because anything is worth it to get the children home.
Yeah.
It's just a terrible, terrible thing. And I suspect that some of their thinking on that has been influenced by watching the Israelis being pushed into this intolerable position. It's incredibly hard in Israel because not only is there the religious edict to fight for life, and
would you agree that Sharon's unilateral disengagement was at least in part due to the toll taken as a result of the Intifada, strengthening the Palestinian perspective that terrorism worked? Probably, yeah. Does anything I said imply that I would disagree with that necessarily? I'm sure they probably felt like it worked to some extent. That's when a lot of the pressure to negotiate stuff has come after like big wars or acts of violence, yeah.
And that this is one of the commandments central to the faith. But it is also a commandment that then is central to the state. Everybody, when they join the army, the air force, everyone flying a dangerous raid over enemy territory.
Do you consider Sharon's disengagement a mistake then? No, I think it was probably a good idea. The mistake or the tragedy is that he wasn't able to fully disengage from the West Bank as well.
Is told, if something happens, we will come and get you back. We'll come and get you back. We tear up the earth to get our people back. Everybody in the IDF knows, no man left behind. No man left behind on the battlefield. And so Hamas, like Hezbollah, know that that is the Israeli view, that they put an exceptionally high price on life. And by the way, that isn't just the life of Jews, to preempt one inevitable line of attack. It is literally to get back every Israeli. And the Israelis who have been captured, by the way, included Bedouin, Arabs, Druze, and others. But it's agonizing. It is completely.
Do you research on Israel's nuclear weapons program during the Israel-Palestine War? Nope. Although the meme that I've heard is that they stole secrets or somehow from the United States. Although I don't know exactly how that works, because they would still have to like enrich uranium and stuff. Maybe there are the processes for it and all that. But I do know for sure they had nuclear weapons available to them for the '73 war, because I think there are conversations between Golda Meir and Moshe Dayan, the Minister of Defense, about potentially having to use nuclear weapons. And I think in the early morning, of the first of the '73 war, of the Yom Kippur fight.
Agonizing as Hamas knew it would be. Some families of the hostages refused to engage in the hostage families forum and its work because they said we know, and our child knew, and sometimes a child had left a message saying, please don't swap me. It's not worth it. Other families will suffer. And they really do. I mean, there was in one of the swaps, I myself, having, spent all this time there and getting to know so many people involved, victims and families and more, I myself had one the other month where one of the hostages released was someone whose family I know well. And one of the terrorists released in swap from the Israeli side was a man who killed the brother of a friend of mine in Israel some years ago. So one family is celebrating in a way which it's like a miracle.
Yeah, you cannot begrudge that celebration.
And on the other hand, there's a family who knows that their loved one's killer is free after only a few years in prison. So this is all just horrible, and it's deliberately horrible because Hamas makes it so. The torture porn they push out on videos, videoing hostages, watching the release of other hostages in order to double up the pressure. But
interviewing a hostage they're releasing, knowing that his family has been killed, but he doesn't know it.
Yeah,
that was. It's every permutation of this. Is
yes,
so
he got back. The Biba's father gets back, believes because he's been separated from his wife and kids that they must be alive, and then finally is released from over a year of torture and deprivation in the underground tunnels of Hamas, and then discovers that both his babies and his wife dead.
But I think, if memory serves, I think they asked him on camera whether he was looking forward to seeing his family,
right.
knowing the status of his family.
That's right.
Yeah.
Jesus, I never even heard that story. It's pretty fucked up. Not good.
That's right. It can't be understood enough, this, from the Western viewpoint, that the reason I use the term death cults is that some people, some groups, literally worship death. They glorify in death. They love death.
We love death more than you love life.
Yes.
That has to be taken at face value.
Yes, and as Nasrallah said in 2004, he said the great weakness of the infidel is their love of life, and we will use it against them.
I understand. I know, and it's sexy to fucking identify all the crazy Islamic Muslim wacko shit this way. I get it. Okay, listen. I like hating religion as much as the next guy, but like, when anybody that's fighting for an ideal will look up to the ideal more than life itself, right? I've given the American quote a billion times, right? Give me liberty or give me death. Like, everybody feels this way. They feel like they're fighting for a greater purpose. Like, they're going to fight for something. I love my ideal more than I love death, or more than you think you live life or whatever. Like, I'm willing to die for my bullshit. Like, all of the early Israeli shit is literally emblematic of this. Bro, when you were moving to Israel early on, that shit sucked ass. And not only did it suck ass, you were literally moving after, like, I think it was 2 prior waves of Israelis fucked off completely because it sucked ass so much. I think the first group was in the 1880s. I think there was another group in the 1890s. And then I think they tried to finally get their finances and shit together to do it better in the first serious group. I want to say it was in the 1910s, maybe. I don't remember the exact dates, but I think it was the third Aliyah. Is when they finally like had a serious group that was able to go and stick and be there. But like, it was like a shitty time going to Israel. This was a land that had no fucking resources. It wasn't developed at all. Okay, you're literally going there to work in your itty bitty fucking crazy retarded farmlands. Like, this place sucks shit. You weren't necessarily going to a better life, but you were there. Early Israelis or early Jews, I guess I should say, were willing to make the sacrifice to move to the early Yishuv because they thought down the road there would be a better life for them or for the Jewish people, and that was I think a big motivating force to get them to make those sacrifices early on. So Jews should understand. Everybody understands this. Once we've gotten comfortable and once we've accomplished some sort of status quo that we're happy with, everybody seems to forget, or everybody seems to be, so confused as to how can these people continue to fight even though they're all dying and losing all the time. It's like, motherfucker, like, every big country basically did this. Where do you think all of our countries came from? Were people willing to fight like this?
But as you know, that's one of the things I meditate on in this book is what is the answer to that? Because for much of my life, I thought it was almost unanswerable. What do you do against a movement that not only glorifies in your death, but glorifies in the deaths of their own side and sometimes in the deaths of their own family, like Ismail Haniyeh, who finds out that his sons, all Hamas leaders, have been killed in an airstrike.
Yeah, we have the video. We can see his reaction to that knowledge.
He's happy.
Yeah.
He's happy.
So this is a piece that I think it's very difficult for people to understand, especially secular people. And it's easy for us to allied or seem to allied in our description of this phenomenon as other people.
Hold on.
Yeah.
He's that his sons, all Hamas leaders, have been killed in an airstrike.
Yeah, we have the video. We can see his reaction to that knowledge.
He's happy.
Yeah.
He's happy.
The death of sons is pretty crazy. I would agree. Now, I don't know how many kids he has. Maybe he didn't like these kids. But you can see aspects of this even in Western culture today. For instance, and it sounds bad to say, and nobody else will admit it probably, or maybe they will, I don't know. But like, when a major attack happens, you're praying to God that it's a whole bunch of people that you like that got killed. You're praying to God, holy shit, there was a shooting at whatever. Oh, fuck. I hope the shooting was like fucking minorities or some shit. I hope it wasn't all white people or something. Oh, God, like I hope the shooter wasn't, because you don't want the shooter to be on your side. Like even in the West, we do this, where people fight over, like who was radicalized by which side, or why did they target some people? Like, and you want it to be the other side that's engaged in some unhinged behavior because you know that it furthers your own political ends. Same thing with this shit, with the Hamas or anybody else. Like, yeah, of course they're happy when civilians dies because they know they're getting a huge political payoff for it. Anytime this is why I say Hamas fights in a way that maximizes civilian death. For some reason, all the pro-Pallies can never, ever acknowledge this. Well, it's not for some reason. It's because they're bad faith as fuck, but...
So this is a piece that I think it's very difficult for people to understand, especially secular people. And it's easy for us to allied or seem to allied in our description of this phenomenon as being evil or as being an expression of hate, because it's worse than that. I actually think jihadism, I think there's something worse than evil. I'm not saying that there isn't evil to be found here or that there isn't hate to be found here, but misguided religious exaltation, misguided religious triumphalism allows for actually psychologically normal and otherwise compassionate people to be part of a death cult. So I was reading your book, and I had this thought that the framing, the evil framing, was somehow not capturing what I was worried about here. And I've been worried about it again for now going on something like 25 years. And I remembered that I saw an ISIS video, this had to have been at least 10 years ago, maybe 2014, of ISIS members throwing gay men and boys or men and boys who they claimed were gay off of rooftops. I think they were also toppling walls. These are traditional punishments. But I remember seeing some video where there was actual tenderness being expressed by the ISIS fighters toward the people they were about to kill. Like I remember seeing, and I wasn't sure whether I hallucinated this or that, just that it was fabricated in memory. I remember seeing the reassurance, like it's going to be okay, bro. Like we have to do this to you, but this is you say the Shahada and you're going to be fine, right? Like it was not clearly not an expression of hatred.
Do you think the point they were trying to make is that while there are aspects of this in Western culture and other groups, the degree to which religious groups, particularly Islamist extremists, champion and revel in death is what makes it unique? The issue that I have with them is they're fighting against people in the West having a poor understanding of how like crazy these people are, which I think is fair because people in the West are delusional when it comes to the pro-Palestinian people. Oh, they're just like a peace-loving people that want a democracy and everything just like ours. A really great example of this was Hassan when he said, and other people have said this too, but I remember Hassan saying on stream, the only reason why they don't have equality for gays and stuff is just because we bomb them so much, LOL. Like if America would just stop, they would have like total equality for all their gay people. Like it's just like an unhinged, retarded thing. Like no. So they're right when they push back against that absurd notion that, especially white people in the West have, that, oh, these societies are just like us. They're just like us. It's just the imperialism is standing in the way of us seeing it. However, where they go too far, in my opinion, is they start to essentialize it to either the people or the religion, saying they're not like us, but the reason they're not like us is because of Islam and jihad and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, well, they're probably not like us for a variety of reasons. Like one is because they are like embroiled in constant conflict, and these things are going to be more present in your mind versus, LGBT rights or some bullshit like that. But these things can change, and they have in groups of people, like including Muslims, even ones from the Middle East.
And just before this, I did a search. I couldn't find the video, but I found a still from what I'm sure is the video. And I want you to look at this because there's so much contained in this image.
There's so much.
Now, the vibe being communicated by the two people who have hands on that man's shoulder, right, is not hatred, right? Everyone you see there is an ISIS fighter, and the man who's in a hood is about to be hurled off a rooftop, right? There's something more disturbing about this for me than mere evil. Again, the evil is there. I mean, I have no doubt that Sinwar was a psychopath and a sadist, and we have a tremendous amount of testimony on that point, much of which you give in the book. But what is worse is that it's possible for a death cult ideology to subsume the values of even good people, even normal people. Once you recognize that these people actually believe that they know the moral structure of the universe and how to live within it, and they know there's one way to get to paradise. And that's the only thing that matters. And this world is worthless, right? This is just an antechamber to either hell or paradise. And the only thing that matters is that you're going to the right place. Then I think we're in the presence of a very different phenomenon, which is quite a bit scarier. What is scary is that when you think of something like the Nova Music Festival, which you write about so in such a searing way in the book, that for me crystallizes this collision between Western freedom and tolerance and compassion and the jihadist project.
Crystallizes it. Also, oh no, Mohammed Hijab.